embedded reporters it is a problem. There is an active campaign in Afghanistan and other places to distort the truth by buying off journalists and radio stations that are meant to be independent, that have been set up by USAID and claim to be independent. So we can see in this material, in the Afghan war diaries, numerous examples of journalists or radio stations being given PSYOP content. So here's an example where Radio Ghazwan was given 12 hours of psychological operations radio content programming and a schedule on which it was dictated on, and we can see the payment. And in one of these handouts you'll see another, but there's quite a lot of these occurring in Afghanistan. And unfortunately what this means is that if there is a victory of a sort by ISAF forces, how legitimate will that victory be? If it came about as a result of manipulating the population into an untruthful understanding of what the war was about. So, unfortunately, these sorts of operations, which we've also seen in relation to Farsi news sites paid for by the State Department, run by Israel, mean that the legitimate dissent within a country, legitimate campaigns against the Taliban and their abuses cannot be trusted, because you never know who's actually paying for it. Similarly, legitimate dissidents from Iran who would start up news sites, are their voices to be trusted or not? The Iranian population can't tell, because a lot of them are propaganda sites. And we then end up into a situation where the population has nothing to go on, where everything is some kind of mud, where each step is a step into quicksand intellectually, because it's not based upon anything firm or grounded. And we hope in our release of material like this and all the other sorts of things we've done over the years, where we've provided information that is not opinion and it is not our analysis, although we have done that, but rather it is the raw material produced by the organizations themselves, not for a wider audience, but rather for their own internal audience. Information that was never designed to manipulate you or some other population group or journalists, but rather was designed for the internal constraint, if you like, to manipulate the employees or or fit in with what the hierarchy requests, for example, in the United States military. And I see that as a key difference in understanding the difference between reality and a massaged perception of reality. There was criticism of these war diaries by the US administration, who tried to disarm them, saying that this was material that was not high-level analysis. It didn't come out of the White House, but rather this was material that was collected by soldiers and intelligence agents on the ground. And that, to me, is the strength of this archive. It is interfacing, it has come about as a direct result of numerous incidents before it has had real time to be massaged or put into politically correct language. And that means that people can produce analysis on their own with these basic facts that the Pentagon and other organizations have used to perform their own analysis. All the statistical reports, nearly all the statistical reports that are coming out of the Pentagon for this war, coming out of NATO for this war, are based upon this archive. So when you see a chart in civilian casualties, and that going up or down, promoting result. That chart is a result of this material. So any sort of different statistical analysis is open to academics and to mathematicians and to journalists. So I really see this basic information from which all other information is derived as the most important ingredient to get into the historical record.
Thank you very much, Julian. And while we are, I open the floor for questions, but if I could start by asking you to describe a little bit more in detail this ethical dilemma that you are facing with dealing with all this information. How have you processed? How have you reflected upon handling this in order to achieve the right balance between the right to knowledge on the one hand, and of course the risk of individuals that can be easily exposed?
Yeah, so there are no easy choices for our organization. We have different duties to different topics. We have a duty to the people most directly affected by this material, the people of Afghanistan, and the course of this war, which is killing hundreds every week. We have a duty to the broader historical record and its accuracy and its integrity. And we have a duty to our sources to try and protect them where we can. And within those duties, we have certain constraints. And those constraints are principally the amount of resources that we have and the amount of assistance that we can get in dealing with such material. So for this particular case, we brought in Guardian, New York Times and Der Spiegel as our press partners because there was so much information to go through. Now those three organizations didn't pursue getting this information into the public record as primary source material. They pursued getting stories into the public record, their own particular view on what parts of this material were. So it was our task to get the primary source material into the historical record where journalists and policymakers can use it directly. Now, there are innocent individuals named in this. There are also individuals who are not innocent who are named. For example, the chief of the radio station who took bribes by American psychological operations. Is that an innocent individual or not? Would they be a target for retribution or not? There are many examples like that, and they're very tedious to work through. But understanding the limitations, we approach things heuristically, which is we understand which parts of the material are most likely to contain names which are innocent. And that is why we separated some 15,000 documents from the broader collection for line-by-line review, and that has been happening. It's an expensive and difficult process, which the Pentagon so far has refused to assist with. They have stated, we are not interested in having a conversation about harm minimization. We are only interested in having all this material destroyed. That review is approximately 8,000 reports in, and once we get to 15,000, we'll release them. Now, some journalists, unfortunately, are enumerate. That is, they don't seem to understand what it means to go through 91,000 reports. This is not going through 900 reports. This is not going through 90 reports. This is an extraordinary compendium of information, and it is simply not economically feasible for this organization without assistance to go through line-by-line reviews of 91,000 reports. So we are then put into a position where we have to either delay release of this material for 3 or 4 years to conduct such a review without assistance, or separate out those parts which are most likely to need line-by-line review and those parts which are less likely based upon the US military's own internal standards. Now, it appears that the US military did not obey its own internal standards in relation to keeping certain, in relation to not using identifying information of some of its informants. So that is regrettable. But in the end, if we are forced into a position, which fortunately we are not, but if we are forced into a position where we would have had to have released all this material without separating out any of it, or release none, the value, the extraordinary value of this historic record to the progress of that war and its potential to save lives outweighs the danger to innocence. So far, the Pentagon has stated yesterday that, to its knowledge, no one has been injured as a result of this material. That doesn't mean no one has, but no one, as far as the Pentagon is aware, and it's trying to push this case to the best of its ability, has been injured. But in the same period of time, the Afghan government states that NATO killed 52 civilians in just one incident, and there's been numerous others during that time. So we really do have to keep things in perspective. We are dealing with a war. Wars kill people. Wars kill many, many people. And if this organization is to play its role, then we are forced to take difficult decisions. And this is an example of one of those difficult decisions.
Thank you very much. I open the floor for questions, and the first question I have there, the gentleman in the black. Could you please also introduce yourself? And I ask everyone to introduce yourself before taking a question.
Yes, my name is Carl Sigford. I'm a member of the Swedish Parliament. So first I just want to thank you for what you're doing, and I hope that Sweden can remain a zone for free speech in the future too. And that's also what my question is about. Internet regulation and how that affects Wikileaks. In Europe, for instance, we have a data retention directive that's being implemented, meaning that we get rid of online anonymity to some extent. We also have some initiatives going on for blocking certain content on the internet. Do you see this as a development that will eventually suffocate initiatives like Wikileaks?
There's a tendency to harmonization presently between differing laws from different countries. And the European Union is perhaps the clearest example, because as a supranational state with fast interactions, it tends to harmonize faster. Within that mix, there's all sorts of political opportunities that is occurring. Now, the data retention issue has long been contentious, and the German Supreme Court 2 months ago found that data retention was unconstitutional and struck out all existing retained data and ordered it to be deleted. Now, the German Supreme Court found that there were cases where data retention could be legitimate, but they would have to be narrowly defined, and they would have to exclude individuals communicating with journalists or ministers, for example. It could not be blanket data retention. In Iceland, we have been involved in an initiative which has passed the parliament there unanimously as a proposal which then orders the ministry to draft legislation to push in the other direction, which is to take the best free speech protection laws from across the world, including from Sweden, and create a system that is very